So I told you what's in it for you, what it looks like, why it's important because of the fragility of the world we live in, and how you need public-private dialogue to adapt and to develop sectors, and that it has good impact. Now the $1 million question is how to do it. And the real answer is we don't know, because we don't have the answer for all places, because every place is different. But what we've seen is that there seem to be some common ingredients that seem to be there every time it works. And it's a bit like a chef in a kitchen. I'm French, so I like to use food analogy all the times. It's like the chef in a kitchen, because we can tell kind of what ingredients you need to have in a kitchen at all time to do good cooking, but we can't really tell the chef what to do, because the chef wants to reflect his own or her own personality and origins and what they want to do for the right kind of people that's going to come and eat tonight. And so the dish going to look different every time, but you're going to have common ingredients. Every cake, you're going to have some kind of eggs, some kind of milk, some kind of sugar, some kind of flour, and some kind of raising agent. Now with that, you can do 1,000 different cakes. And it's the same thing with public-private dialogue. We can tell you roughly what the key elements that are required at the beginning, the elements that seem to go into it when it's working, and we can look at the lives of PPDs, but we can't give you a recipe. And so this is what we've seen, is that we've seen that there seem to be prerequisites to enter the kitchen, prerequisites to start a dialogue process. And we see 4 dimensions, and we call this came up with this in a 2005 article, and we call this the PPD Diamond, for lack of a better term. What's the PPD Diamond? It puts together 4 actors. Of course, the business community and the public authorities. And on the public authorities, they need sufficient capacity to do it, and political will to do it, really, and the leadership to do it. Do they want to talk to the private sector? I mean, if the answer is no, you might bring them to it at some point, but most likely it's going to be more difficult. They might get warm to the thing, but you need to have some element of political will and some readiness to do it. That means a bit of coordination as well between the different people in the public authorities, and the same in the business community. But the first thing in the business community is you need to have a sense of security. If you're in a country where you think that if you put your head above the water, you'll get shot at, then you don't speak out. A lot of countries where we've been working in, this is the way it was happening before, where if people spoke up, they literally got shot in the street. You can't speak up against the power, because when you speak up against, even if it's something that seems trivial like a regulation or something, you might actually be breaking the untold rules of leaving people having their privilege and trying to break those privileges. And so you also need security from the most basic sense. Like in a war zone, it's difficult to do public-private dialogue. We see it today in Iraq, for instance. But also the business community needs to be organized. And that's why often public-private dialogue starts with private-private dialogues, because you need to have some kind of a unified voice from the private sector. So countries that have a history of in non-governmental organization or civil society organization with strong business associations have a tendency to be better able to do this than countries where you have absolutely nothing, because you have to first create that network of advocates. Now that's not quite enough, because of course if there were a complete dialogue between the two, we wouldn't be speaking about this, but most likely there is not complete dialogue between the two. There is a disconnect. So what you need in there is you need a champion in the middle, and the champion can help you because this is someone who understands the public sectors and the way they speak and actually knows the people, And this person also understands the private sector and the way they speak, and he or she actually knows the people. And that can be an institution, that can be an actual physical person. And that person will be the champion and say, guys, why don't we do something together? Please come to the table. We'll start a discussion. That often is not enough. It needs to be sustained after the first impetus and as you go forward with what we call instruments. A little bit of logistics, a little bit of money to help things going. We need to do a working group meeting. We need to gather with each other. Who's going to pay for the food? Who's going to host it? You know, we did I think 7-8 months ago, they were in the Jordan Valley Water Forum was gathering, and one issue was, can we help people come from all the places of the Jordan Valley, all the farmers, can we bring them to one place? Is there logistic costs? Some people don't have a car, how are we going to do it? Or who's going to pay for the food here? A little bit of instruments is helpful, but instruments is not just food and logistics. It can be, well, actually, we need lawyers. We need lawyers because those people are talking, the champion put them together, and they're talking about some reforms. Do you have people who have knowledge of that area, who have knowledge of the legality of this area, who are technical experts, who are engineers, who can contribute to it? Who's going to pay those people to come and consult? So you need a bit of instruments. So these are the 4 prerequisites, and together they constitute a diamond, like I just put on this slide. And so you could measure any country, any situation, any sector, any city, and you could say, well, this is roughly where people stand right now. Do we have what it takes? And eventually you want something where, you have a more balanced range. So you could measure a lot of things like this. Now, if it takes 4 dimensions to start it, we've also seen that it takes kind of 12 dimensions to keep it going. So here we're getting a little bit into the detail of what it is to implement a public-private dialogue, and again, they're just ingredients. We saw that there are a number of things that seem to matter. And we even devised a tool that can kind of measure how much flour and how much sugar and how many eggs are you putting in the cake. How is the mandate and institutional alignment organized? How is the structure made up? What kind of output it does? How much outreach and communication? We found together 12 dimensions. And those 12 dimensions are as follows. Mandate and institutional alignment. What is the mandate of the group? It's just someone who decided to speak on behalf of everybody, or it's a group that was mandated by the general community or by the government to do something? And what's the document that brings that mandate? Is there actually a constituting documents? Is there a law that puts this public-private dialogue on, or is there like a memorandum of understanding between a number of private sector entities to say we're going to do this together? And how is it aligned with institutions? Because remember that if you have a public-private dialogue, it's going to talk to the government at some point, and the government is organized in some time a number of silos, line ministries or line agencies or line department. And what's the relationship of this public-private dialogue initiative to all those different agencies is very important. For instance, if you're dealing with agricultural development, you might think that the anchoring of the public-private dialogue might be in the Ministry of Agriculture, but the truth is, in order to develop the agricultural sector, you're going to talk about skills development. You're going to talk about infrastructure issues, about accessing financing, about technology, about regulations. And those happen in other ministries and Ministry of Agriculture. So what's going to be the relationship? Because if it's completely aligned with one ministry, when there is an issue that corresponds to another ministry, they're going to say, hey guys, I understand your issue here, but in my ministry we don't deal with that. My minister did not ask me to do this. And so this issue of institutional alignment is very important, and who participate and how it's organized. The second point is the structure and the participation. And the structure is like, how is it structured? Is there a committee? Is there a council? Are there working groups? Is it just a round table that happens every so often? Many type of structure, and who participates and who decides, and what are the kind of terms of reference of participants, and how do they get selected? Do they get elected? Do they get nominated? Do they self-nominate themselves? Like, how does it happen? Who are the champions and what are their role is our third criteria. Again, I'm not telling you you need to have a champion, but we know that in any public-private dialogue, we need to ask the question, are there champions? If so, what do they do? Do they control the agenda? Do they help the agenda? Are there many champions for many different kind of topics that are called when there is a blockage somewhere? And what do they do? Are they employed? Are they not employed by it? Are they just, interested in general? What's the role of the facilitation? Is there a facilitating secretariat at the middle? Is there a coordinator? An individual that will take upon herself or himself to actually go and convene everybody? Is that a professional person? Is that someone who comes from the government, from the private sector? Is that someone who comes from the academia? And this facilitation role, how is it organized? Is it actually codified? Is it someone like when someone is employed? Again, terms of reference, specific work plans. Where do they work? How are they financed? What kind of output does the platform decide to do? Very wide issues, white papers about the state of education in the country, or specific reforms about the number of teachers in each classroom. There's a range of outputs. What kind of outreach and communication does the group does? If there are reforms, if there are actions between the partners, are they communicated? But also, do communicate to the general population about the results? Do you communicate to the civil servants about the issues? Gather information from them, do surveys? What's the extent of that communication? And similarly, what's the extent of the monitoring and evaluation which is performed to measure the success or failure of results? And what kind of systems are put in place to measure those results and those impacts? Because if you don't do that, you don't know if the advocacy that was done is successful or not. And once things are implemented on the ground, you don't know if they were the right things, if they work, if they don't, and you can't do course corrections. Then we find different criteria like, is this relevant at the subnational level or a subsector level or not? And if so, if there are subsectors of whatever area we're tackling that are concerned, how are those catered for? Through specific issues, specific working groups, specific experts, are those people represented? Are there representations and regional committees that are floating around, or regional topics where people meet ad hoc and there is something in the center? So there is a lot of things. What's the relevance of this dialogue process to bringing more investment into the sector in general? Foreign direct investment is something that comes back very often. And is this something that's going to cater to it? For instance, is the public-private sector dialogue going to serve as an aftercare mechanism for investors where they can discuss issues with the government once they're in? Is it going to serve as some kind of a promotion agency or investment development agency where they can actually work out some regulations that's going to make it easier for either foreign investment or local investment to develop? And if so, what's the relationship between this public-private dialogue and other agencies that do the same type of work, investment development? then what are the kind of measures, systems, behaviors that you see in a PPD that are really put in place to prevent conflict or to resolve conflict? And again, that can be a crisis detection mechanism, where you have a watch function, where some people are always watching for what's happening in that market, for instance, and being able to inform everybody else. Or are there ad hoc provisions where the private sector and the government can quickly meet if something happens to solve issues? What are the provisions here to solve conflict between people? For instance, there can be the public-private dialogue can serve as an alternative dispute resolution, an ADR mechanism to have a mediated conflict resolution between partners for public-private partnership contracts, for instance, which are contracts between a government entity and a private sector provider to deliver goods or services for the state. And finally, what are the role of the development partners or external funders that might come in and invest and support financially, logistically, through human capacity, that public-private dialogue? Is the public-private dialogue actually independent of the people who help it? Or did they develop over time this kind of relationship where they can't unstick themselves from it, and it's hard to develop local capacity? How much of the budget of the public-private dialogue is dependent on external sources, not from the actual participant of the dialogue, but from a donor or a development partner that will help it out? All those things are dimensions that one can explore and can look into the way it's done in different countries and what works best for my country, what works best for my sector, my city, and so on. So really there is no one way to do it. There's many ways to do it, but these are dimensions we can look into.